Hello, everyone. This is Jeremy Dennis, lead artist of Moz House. Thank you so much for listening. This episode, we have Jenie Gao and Daesha Devon Harris. I'm going to read the bios for Jenie and Daesha. They're both really talented artists. So I'll start with Jenie Gao. Jenie is a current resident artist here at Moz House on the Shinnecock Indian Reservation. She's a full-time artist, creative director, and entrepreneur known for her anti-gentrification arts business, specializing in public art, printmaking, social practice, and storytelling. Jenie's work is shaped by her experiences as a second-generation Taiwanese, Chinese American, and a woman of color, with a background in the museum, public education, and manufacturing sectors. She advocates for artists' labor rights and institutional accountability. Jenie has mentored 25 paid apprentices through her program and relocated to Vancouver, BC, to pursue her MF work in ethics in art institutions. Her art has been showcased internationally, and she has spoken at TEDx Madison. So welcome, Jenie.
Thank you.
Daesha, I'll go next, is also a current resident artist at Moz House here on the Shinnecock territory. Daesha is an interdisciplinary visual artist whose work probes the intersections of narrative, history, and the politics of place and the greater African diaspora, intertwined with photography, mixed media, text, and video. The gentrification of her hometown, Saratoga Springs, New York, and its effect on the local Black community. Both of these things have played a major role in her advocacy and her artwork. Daesha holds a BFA in studio art from the College of St. Rose and an MFA in visual art from the University of Buffalo, and her work has been exhibited in solo and group exhibits all throughout the United States. Welcome, Daesha. What I'm going to do, hopefully, is maybe do some combined questions, maybe some individual questions to get started, but maybe in the first one, I'm going to ask this to both of you. Can you both talk about how your work engages with history and place? And for each of you, can you define the role of place in your art and how you have had personal experiences to shape the stories that you tell? So Jenie, I'll go first with you.
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, so in terms of how place and history has informed my work, I talk a lot about the connections between the local and global effects of colonialism and imperialism, and how gentrification is just a localized version of what we see happening globally with displaced peoples around the world. My background, mom and her family immigrated from Taiwan, and my father immigrated from China, and they met in the United States. And as an example, in one of the recent series that I've been developing called The Negotiation Table, for which I'm actually working on a piece during my residency here at Moz House, I've been taking these furniture pieces that are often credited to the British, to the French, to European furniture design, but that are actually culturally appropriated from China and from historically Chinese designs, and that these furniture pieces inspired Europeans to fund expeditions to go out and search for a shorter route to Asia via the Atlantic Ocean, and their westward search that resulted in them landing on Turtle Island and ultimately catalyzed westward expansion and colonization of what we today know as the Americas. And so I'm connecting this long-term desire that Europeans had to conquest Asia and to possess the artwork, the culture, the heritage of Asia with the colonization of Turtle Island. And so I'd say that in this I'm often looking to cultivate the long-term cultural memory that's necessary for people who are living as a part of a diaspora to remember what got us to this point so that we can resist assimilation and actually reclaim and steward our own stories.
Thank you, Jenie. And Daesha, how does place and inform your work and your experiences?
Yeah, place is my starting point for all of my artwork and my advocacy, probably first out of necessity, and secondly because I really love the place and the land that I was born in. And just in my lifetime, the Black population of Saratoga has been decreased by half, and so that includes a huge dispossession and displacement of the majority of my own family. And obviously, like, that was just a firsthand staunch example of what was going on. And it's something that I think about all the time and really informs my work.
Answer, and I admire how both of you are telling such personal stories, and yet at the same time, you're definitely telling something that everyone can connect to around the globe. Maybe I'll move to this next question, which Jenie will also comment. Your work criticizes the idea of artificial rarity in art. And Daesha, with your work, you address the displacement of communities of color. And so I want to ask the question to both of you once more. How do you both see the tension between value, labor, and the politics of space in your different art practices?
That is an excellent question. Yeah, I think that is why I've brought woodcuts into the forefront, and specifically the wood blocks themselves, not just the prints that I make from them, but the actual physical block, into the finished artwork and into the installations that I create, because the wood blocks are evidence of the labor that goes into creating the print. But that as printmaking has become a part of the fine arts, assimilated into the fine arts, it's adopted best practices that require the destruction of the woodblock of evidence of the labor to verify the asset. And I think that is such a poignant parallel to what it means to be a marginalized person and a racialized person in the context of white dominant institutions, that so often we're treated like we're lucky if we get to exist in white spaces. We're often pitted against other BIPOC. I think especially, like, I think about this in terms of the Asian American narrative and the ways in which there's the necessity of having an umbrella term that brings people of different groups together. And then there's also the tension, the homogenization that can happen with that, and the way that Asian Americans have been specifically used and pitted against other racialized groups, and specifically against Black people since the Civil Rights era, even though Black civil rights was happening in tandem with the Vietnam War. And I think that there's, for me, in terms of addressing that tension, it's about bringing that evidence of the labor back into the work, making it central to it, not just as a tool, something that gets discarded or hidden, but that the process is evident in what gets presented in the final installation.
Thank you, Jenie. And just as a reminder for Daesha, if you can talk a little bit about the tension between value, labor, and politics of space in your work.
Yeah, thinking about specifically labor, that is something that I've always been aware of and always have made a point of resisting, probably because the majority of my family are in service work, and service work to wealthy white people. And so I've always had that perspective of what it's like to be invisible, and how you're supposed to maneuver around these people, which makes no sense, because obviously just because they have more money, they're no better than anybody else, but it's just like what has been taught in order for you to survive. And so, yeah, and I see that, of course, the exclusivity of that, of course, extends to the art world. And so I always just make it a point to address those, whether it's like terms we use, for example, like outsider art. And I hate this term so much that I've put it out of my brain, but the term that they use for photographs that are like found, what is that term?
That's a good question. We might have to add it back to the episode.
Okay.
Appropriated?
Nope. Oh, God. Ugh. Jeremy will think about it. Think of it in 1 second. But it's basically a term that was given to, quote, novice photographers, or just like family photographers, to make a differentiation between the value of that person's art and the value of the professional artist, the person who has had the opportunities and the privilege to be supported and being deemed an artist is more valuable than the person who does it for the sake of the work and to archive a family history. I hate that. And so I always really like to push against those terms and at least call them out so that people understand. And that's really something that drew me to photography. The work of Gordon Parks, like, just blew my mind the first time I saw it when I was in high school. And like, as soon as I saw that, I said, that's what I want to do. And that kind of value or is really rampant and specific to photography, specifically documentary style photography. You have to devalue it because it's not fine art. And so I just off the bat was going to rail against that because I can see that that work is mostly done by people of color or low income white people, and so of course you want to make a separation there so that they don't fancy themselves artists when of course they are. But yeah, those type of things are always on my mind in every aspect of both my artwork and just my regular life.
And since the listeners can't see us, and I'm the only one with a laptop, I looked it up. It's vernacular.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
So that's found photography and amateur photography. That's what it says compared to the fine art as you described.
Yeah.
But this next question actually relates to what you both were speaking about, which is collaboration and community. And part of the emphasis of why we have Ma's House is to bring in artists of color to both engage with Shinnecock and bring visibility to our community. Somehow it's been rendered invisible, but this next question talks about community in your art. How do you engage with the communities whose stories you tell, and what responsibility do you feel as artists to represent those voices authentically?
Do you want to go first this time?
I feel complete responsibility to my community and anybody's story who I'm attempting to uplift and or shine a light on. Yeah, again, like growing up in a predominantly white city, the Black population is less than 2%. Our stories were nowhere out in the dominant narrative, just completely erased. And of course, think that these stories are incredible and amazing. They are, and are just as worthy to be explored and documented. And I have to. There's just a few of us left in Saratoga, and yeah, it's just, I've had a lot of death in my family from an early age, and just the loss of all that ancestral wisdom and family stories and history really put an impression on me at a young age. And so I just am like desperate to like capture and preserve as much as I possibly can.
Yeah, so one branch of my practice is doing social practice work and community storytelling, and I've been very fortunate to have the opportunity to interview probably hundreds of people at this point for different projects. And in that work, recognizing the social responsibility that comes with stewarding other people's stories and creating a safe space for them to share. And so as one example, I did this project with a neighborhood called Bayview, which is in Madison, Wisconsin. It's an affordable housing neighborhood, one of the most diverse neighborhoods in Madison, Wisconsin, and represents over 14 different nationalities just within this one small community. And I collaborated with a photographer named Jenie Gao, and over the course of, I think, close to 2 years, we met with, interviewed, and photo documented many of the families that live in Bayview. And the way we framed this project with the neighborhood was that first and foremost, it was a gift to the community. And so they had no obligation to participate in anything else with us as artists, with the foundation that funded this project. And they could just sign up to have me as the interviewer and the story editor to record their story. So a lot of these families, for instance, may be refugees and may not have even told their own children or grandchildren their own stories of how they got here. And so I would record their stories for them, edit them for their family members. Jamie would take their family portraits, and they would get to choose who they wanted in the portraits, where they wanted it taken, and what they wanted to be wearing, and really got to direct the whole process. We made a very clear community participant agreement that specified that they were the owners and the agents of their own stories and their own images, and that they got to opt in to the permissions that they gave to us as the artists and to the foundation. They did not have to agree to anything with us. They could just simply take the gift, and that was enough. At the end of the project, 37 families did agree to be a part of a book called Bayview Portraits. It's in the local public library system now, and then the book ultimately got built into the fundraising campaign to expand the affordable housing campus. And so I see that as an example of direct action where the residents of this neighborhood, their stories and their images getting used in this way for this book are now, like, the funds for that are directly benefiting them. It's going into more housing. It's going into senior housing for people who want to age out in this neighborhood. It's going into their community gardens. It's going into a brand new community center for them. And that's where the financial resources are going to go. And so I see all of that as being an example of trying to be socially responsible with people's stories. Coming into my own personal stories, because as you pointed out, Jeremy, I'm talking about these bigger political stories, but then also about my own family stories. I'd be curious actually to hear you, Daesha, talk a little bit about this as well. But as I negotiate between telling these larger historic stories of neighborhoods and of other people, there's some similarities. There's some of these tools that you can bring into your own family and into personal spaces. And then there are also some negotiations around that and the responsibility of being the family member who is telling these stories. People may not always agree with you. There may be stories that they don't want shared, right? And some people want things to be recorded. Other people want things to be left in the past. And it can be a really loaded thing to tell family stories. I don't know. I want to open this up into a conversation and how you've navigated this for you.
Something that I started learning, I would say, maybe about 15 years ago, was it started with my maternal grandmother, and she would tell me stories about her mom and her father, and they were really just rose-colored glasses as what the term my mom would use. And the reason I say that is because her younger sister, who was probably about 7 to 10 years younger than her, and who clearly was the only child left after my grandmother left, and then alone, and so she had a completely different experience, and the stories that she tells are horrifying, or were horrifying. And so she would say it in front of my grandmother, and my grandma would just be like so upset because she's, no, that's not how it is. But like, it was at that point I realized everybody has a different experience. With the same formula, like same adults, same location, but everybody's experience is different, and even everybody's memory is not.
Or how people interpret things, how they themselves have figured out how to cope and frame things in the long run is different.
I recently recorded a conversation between two of my uncles, my paternal uncles, and they were having disagreements over a memory of the same thing. So I started realizing that this happens and it's okay, which is why I really love to incorporate in my own work folklore, family history, and documented narratives, if you will. Then I explain when I talk about how I just go from one of these things to the other, that there's fact and fiction in all of these. And so that's how I move easily through all of those things. But yeah, definitely the comfort and the wishes of whoever is the participant is foremost. I'm not ever going, if someone is adamant about, I don't want this out, I would never put that out, because I respect and love all these people who I'm working with.
Thank you for answering that. And we could go into so much depth about family support and being an artist, and how you have a whole series about family as subject matters in your work too. But I'm going to switch gears and ask about the residency experience. So both of you have attended many residencies. You're currently here at Ma's house on the Shinnecock territory. How has either being here at Shinnecock maybe inspired your work, or maybe even context of the Hamptons or that contrast or clashing. Maybe Jenie, if you want to go first.
Yeah, there's definitely a contrast being out here. And this is my second time out here, actually. And I'm grateful to be invited back by Ma's House and to this time get to share space with another artist in residence, which is different from last time when I was the only artist in residence here. And I think that the way that I've started seeing Ma's House and its location on the Shinnecock Reservation in the context of the Hamptons is that there's an opportunity for a protected space. And you cannot necessarily get away from some of the craziness that is the Hamptons. And Daesha and I have had many conversations at this point probably about some of our interactions with white clientele, we'll say, out here. A nice way of putting it, but that we have a place that we can retreat to, and I think that's actually really important. And unfortunately, there's nowhere that you can go in the context of colonial states and colonial nations where you're totally safe from white people. There's just nowhere you can go, and I want to stress that word, like, BIPOC are not safe in white spaces. We are never safe in white spaces. And that's true here in the Hamptons, and that's true in other places. It's probably exaggerated in some ways here because of the exorbitant wealth. But that we can be more resilient and we can sustain ourselves in the context of that if we have each other and we're able to build coalitions with each other. And I think I've just been really moved getting to be here and attend the events just here at Ma's House, the workshops that have been here. We attended a beading workshop with a lot of the aunties and seeing the way in which just the Shinnecock neighbors sustain each other is really wonderful. And then being able to extend that to BIPOC who may not be from this land specifically, but via different diasporas and displacements have built lives here. And I think that there's a lesson for us too in terms of how we continue to be good stewards, even if we may not live on our ancestral homelands. But how do we be good stewards and not assimilate into settler ideologies, to understand that we are a part of larger global displacements and that we should be partners in this work to keep each other safe.
And Daesha, how has being here at Ma's House and here at Shinnecock, what's your impression? How has it informed your work?
Yeah, I am so lucky to be here, and I love being here. And Ma's House, like most BIPOC centered institutions, offers, at a minimum, the understanding of the history of this country and how white supremacy has just committed endless harms. And so to have to take that level of explanation, the burden of explaining that over and over to people who don't understand, to have that taken off is like so freeing. And you come here and you don't have to pre-explain the whole backstory behind your work. You can just start at the meat of it. And that's a priceless gift and is something that's specific to here. And it's just been the best experience to see Jeremy's community and to really be included in such a warm, sincere way is so inspiring. Personally, I'm so excited to learn more about the history of the Shinnecock and the history and connections between Native peoples in Long Island and Native peoples from closer to me in northern New York. One of my grandmother's wish before she passed, she's a very proud Black and Indigenous woman, and she just wanted to make sure that in my artwork and in my life that I don't forget about our Indigenous heritage. And for me, being here is really special, and I'm really trying to honor that and participate and learn as much as I can too.
Thank you for that answer. And maybe this is something we've been talking about all along, but I wanted to ask, especially being here on the Shinnecock territory, the theme of invisibility, I wonder how you both approach the theme of making things visible. And what does it mean in today's society in terms of just social justice and the political climate of visibility? So maybe, Jenny, if you want to start first with your work.
Yeah, I've done a lot of work around familial stories, and some of them are quite vulnerable, digging into some of the tragedies and the losses that led both sides of my families to immigrate to this place, and then also the ongoing violences and marginalizations that they faced in the United States. And I think that as I've gotten older and just developed my practice, I find myself negotiating between the importance of recording these stories. Recording them is an act of advocacy and stewardship, and also how to balance that with protecting these stories and protecting the people that they represent. Not all stories are for consumption, and if some of my family stories are going to be part of a museum exhibition, then what are the rights that I have in that space? What are the protections that I have written into my contracts with the institution to ensure that this is actually a safe space for me to show my work? This isn't just work to be further extracted from for the benefit of these institutions that would benefit from exhibiting somebody like me. So what is actually the fair exchange for me to have a show, yes, but also for them to benefit, to capitalize on saying that they showed an artist of color's work? It's not enough. That I think it's impossible for any of these institutions to ever pay off their debts to us. The entire nonprofit complex, the entire museum industry is built off of wealth that was stolen. Doesn't mean they shouldn't try, but they should know that's actually the position that they're coming from, and that it's not us who should be grateful to them, it's them who should be grateful to us. And I feel like I've gone on a little bit of a tangent from your question.
Oh, no, I love it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, supposed to touch
Okay.
all topics, and it's all related.
And yeah, I'd say that that's a lot of where my mind is now, especially as I think about my work entering more public collections, and specifically my family stories entering these collections. That yes, on the one hand, I want to make sure that my stories are stewarded, that they're recorded, and that stories that historically have been excluded and erased get included in these records. And also, what are the rights that are written around these? What are the permissions that are written around these? And who ultimately benefits from these stories getting recorded? Who gets to see them? Who monetarily benefits from this? And thinking of all aspects of this in that process.
Daesha, do you want to answer? It sounds like those in your photos being shown, or with a hesitancy in different spaces. Visibility can be a good thing, a one-sided agreement in terms of them checking off a box. How do you feel about your work with such personal people in your photographs being out there like that?
Yeah, it's really hard. And I've increasingly started to reject a lot of opportunities based on who has access to the space. I don't feel good at all about imagery and artwork that features Black people just being in a place that is going to be consumed by white people, rich people. I want it to be in a place that is accessible to everybody. So that's a concern of mine. I also don't want to have my artwork in a space if I'm the only Black artist, the only artist of color, or the only woman artist. So if I'm asked to be in an exhibition, and I just started to do this recently because this is completely against my nature of just like, you know what I mean? Not like really vocalizing the things that I'm saying and not like stirring the pot. But after these past 5 years, I'm losing those, I don't know, whatever they are, curtains, guards. But yeah, I just flat out say, are there other artists of color in this show? Who are the other people? And if it's not how it should be, then that's going to be a no for me. And likewise, wherever I am, I'm just also looking for opportunities for other people too, because they are not going to help us. We have to be our brother's keeper, and we have to be helping each other out always. It's a hard thing because it might not lead to some people's description of
But I mean,
success,
I love that you talk about saying no to opportunities and recognizing which ones are actually not worth your time and that you don't want your name to be attached to.
Mhm.
And I actually think that brings us back to an early question that you asked, Jeremy, about BIPOC spaces, about being at a BIPOC residency on Shinnecock land, and that part of us keeping each other safe is learning how to set boundaries and expectations. Yeah.
And one thing that's unique to both of you is you work with addition. So inherently, well, with Jenie's work, you're doing printmaking. Daesha, you're doing photography. So you have the whole idea of limited edition versus open edition. So your work's inherently accessible to whoever you want to make art for. So I wonder if you can comment a little bit about, like, how did you choose these mediums, and does that factor into, like, how you approach your art? Do you want as many people to have your piece as possible, or do you mess with the standards or the norms in the art world and limit it as much as possible?
I've been really battling with that a lot, and really a lot over the past few years, especially because I don't have any money. So some of the things that I make, that I put a lot of time and resources in, I couldn't possibly make it like more than once or twice. And so then I sit back and I think, well, it has a lot, it's powerful, it has like great impact, people respond like really well to it, but I'm like, but who's going to be the keeper of it? And I wish that everything I make could be in a public collection, like, obviously, but that's not feasible. So I am literally constantly battling with that. And I can't remember, it was sometime during COVID, I believe, there was a retrospective of the Harlem Renaissance artist Charles White, and it was a beautiful exhibition. He's one of my favorite artists. In the exhibition was this like calendar with his artwork, and I can't remember exactly, but I think it was in conjunction with some company. Just say it was like in the 40s or 50s, artists would collaborate with just some regular company. I don't know, just say Kleenex. It's not Kleenex, but they would distribute calendars that everyday people could enjoy this artwork and have it in their home, because that's not the impression that you get, and that's not what you're taught, if you will, in art school is the goal. All of this limited and one of a kind and all of this stuff. So when I saw such an esteemed artist have that, and read the description about how it was really important for him to be able to have regular people access to his artwork, I was just like, oh yeah. I still don't know what to do, but I've been constantly thinking about that. And also materials. Spending money on materials makes me feel gross. You know what I mean? There's so much junk in the world and so much wasted labor and money. I'm not saying I do a good job, but I am thinking about ways I can scale back on that. That's definitely what I'm thinking about as I choose what medium lend itself to this story that I want to tell moving forward.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I love this question too, because I think that this is actually something that I play with quite often in my work. I actually stopped numbering my print editions in the last few years, and that was definitely like a height of the pandemic decision. And with the series that I named earlier, this negotiation table series, I often describe printmaking as being the first social media, and this was a tool that enabled communication with the masses. You can reproduce a lot of the same image, a lot of the same message, and printmaking has had a very long history in tandem with various protests and labor movements. And in terms of the limited edition, and as it applies to printmaking, that only applied to printmaking once printmaking became outdated as a technology and assimilated into the fine arts and assimilated to the rules of the fine arts. And so the limited edition was created to make prints artificially rare in order to make them more valuable. Still not as valuable as painting, but valuable enough that maybe they could compete in the same auctions and in the same industry as painting. And especially as an Asian American, and specifically someone whose family comes from Taiwan and from China, and a wave of immigrants that only came after the end of the Chinese Exclusion Act and the end of the Taiwan Magnuson Act that lifted quotas on the number of Chinese and Taiwanese people that could come to the United States and to Canada. There's something insidious about limited editions being built into printmaking best practice, that these prints can only be valuable if they're artificially rare and if you destroy evidence of a labor, because that's how you make them rare, is you destroy the printing plate and you print evidence that you destroyed the plate. There's something insidious about that in conjunction with an immigration like the one that my family is a part of. And I find a lot of synergy between that and the way in which Asian Americans have specifically been framed since the late 1960s as this model minority. And now we have these generations of Asian Americans who, some of whom, a small sector of whom, have gained some economic privilege, but who have run into the bamboo ceiling, who cannot access leadership positions, who cannot actually become anything other than maybe highly skilled tools in service of white supremacist institutions. You're only an acceptable minority if you serve the same systems that oppress you and other BIPOC. And so for me, this negotiation table series and this decision to not number my prints, to not have a quota assigned to them, is a way of challenging that notion of artificial rarity, making the woodblocks themselves, the artwork, making them central to these installations. That's also pushing back on this narrative of artificial rarity. And then even with some of my smaller prints, so I do have smaller reproduction prints that I do sell as a part of an e-commerce store and sell them on my own to people, and they're at more accessible price points. And just like you were saying, I came up through fine arts education that said, no, don't ever sell reproductions of your work. It'll devalue the original. And at a certain point, I was like, why not? And actually part of how I'm coming up on 10 years of self-employment as an artist, of running my own arts business. And a large part of me being able to do that was making some of my artwork more accessible. And I can't do that with all of it. You know, these original woodcuts are quite large and they're very time intensive and expensive to make. And I can only make so many of them, but I can make more commercially available work. And I want to, you were talking about like feeling gross about spending money on material and consumer culture and all that. And I want to challenge that a little bit, Daesha, because we're individual people. We're not these big conglomerates. And commerce is older than capitalism. Commerce has been around as long as people have been around. And there have been many examples of commerce that have functioned without capitalism that can infinitely scale up, infinitely expand and produce and profiteer off of people's labor. And just I'll say this for like the people who are like, oh, but like how are your original woodcuts valuable if they're not numbered? Museums and collectors, public institutions are just going to have to trust that I, as one person, cannot actually physically make that many of these. And that even if I could, they'd still be special. I could, if I made 1,000 of the same woodcut, which is impossible, by the way, but even if I did do that, would still be a drop in the ocean for how many works there are by white men in white institutions. If white institutions, if museums bought every single thing that I've ever made, it would not make a dent in their collections. And so don't worry about whether or not I am putting in barriers of my own to rarefy my work. Don't worry about that. There's like, I will never individually be able to produce in my lifetime enough work to combat against how white public collections and private collections for that matter are. So, yeah.
You both great answers, and we're talking about labor and the edition system, which is always in flux. But this might lead to our last question. You've both been here for about 2 weeks, and eventually the residency ends. Sad. But I wonder if you can maybe mention maybe a project, either like a personal project or an exhibit coming up for you, especially in the realm of art and social justice that you might want to mention. So for listeners who want to continue to support your work and something that's coming up for you.
I am currently working on a project about Timbuktu in North Elba, New York, which is a revolutionary pre-emancipation Black settlement. which was completely erased from history at one point, and like traces of it were destroyed. And that is just like a little bit north of my home, but certainly in the stomping grounds of my family for generations. Yeah, so I'm working on getting funding to continue the project. I see this project as multimedia installation, which will include photographic imagery, sculpture, and installation mixed. Yeah, that's what I'm working on. I don't have a finish date on that or an exhibition booked, but that's no matter because I still have to make the work.
Right.
Yeah.
If there's anyone in the Hamptons that has wealth, Daesha's looking for funding.
Oh, I also have to give a shout out to Black Dimensions in Art, because that's a big part of my life, and especially right now. Black Dimensions in Art is the oldest Black arts organization outside of New York City in New York State, and we're about to celebrate our 50th anniversary in 2025. And so for the past 4 years we've been planning this year, which will include a documentary, hopefully a catalog of the organization's history, and exhibitions, among other things. But one of the main missions of Black Dimensions Art is supporting the youth and showing the youth by examples that Black artists are around and thriving, and that they can also be an artist too, which is really important for people of color because there's not that many examples out there shown publicly anyway. And yeah, so right now a lot of my activism work is wrapped up in this project right now.
Well, congratulations. Yeah, exciting to celebrate that accomplishment. And Jenny, what about you? Exciting projects coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. I've mentioned the negotiation table series a few times, and I'm continuing to expand that work. I've built 5 of these tables so far, and these are large-scale installations. I am in the process of searching for venues, institutions that could host the entire body of work as a solo exhibit. So if there's anybody with connections to an institution that has a good shipping budget and would like some large-scale sculptural installations, come find me. And yeah, I'd say I'm really excited about this new series, and I'm building actually one of the next pieces for the negotiation table here while I'm at the Moz House residency. My next one features a Lazy Susan as a centerpiece and talks about the Lazy Susan as an emblem of Chinese diasporic identity and Asian diasporic restaurants in general that have become community centers. So I've got that series in the works, and then on my public art side, I've also been working for a while now on a project with a metro transit system. It's going to be a few years out yet. The project will be fabricated and installed in 2026. One of the things that I would actually love to happen in tandem with this project is a book, because as a part of this Metro Transit Public Art Commission, and actually a big part of why I won the project, is because I interviewed close to 30 transit writers, and majority BIPOC. And when I became a semifinalist for this project, I looked up the official city survey that they used for surveying transit writers and essentially informing where they're going to expand and set up new bus lines. And I noticed that the city had their survey had interviewed 85% white people, and that is not who rides public transit. And so I created a proposal where I interviewed majority BIPOC. Over 70% of the people that I interviewed were BIPOC transit riders. In addition to the transit riders, I interviewed city staff who all get a free bus pass as a part of their employee benefits, but only some of them actually use them. Primarily white salaried workers are the ones who use this benefit, and BIPOC hourly workers are not able to rely on the bus schedules to take advantage of this employee benefit. And so I interviewed them in addition to the transit writers, and I used these interviews to inform a public art proposal that looks at the passage of time from the perspective of transit users. And so I would love to be able to find funding to do a book in addition to the Public Art Commission. And again, the artwork itself on the side of this building, it's going to occupy close to a city block. That won't come until 2026. But if in the meantime could find a way to actually publish those stories, I think that would be really amazing. And to have that actually be a tool for public transit advocates on the disparities and the needs of where transit lines and infrastructure are built.
Such excellent projects, and yet funding needed. So if anyone listening has some extra support, send it Jenie and Daesha's way. But I think that's the last question. So I want to thank you both for being on the Moss House podcast, for being here at Shinnecock, and any final thoughts.
I'm just having so much fun doing this residency at the same time as Daesha. This is delightful.
Same.
Mm-hmm.
It's the best.
Mm-hmm.
Residency experience is obviously a gift, but when you get to share it with someone who is incredible, oh my God, even better.
Mm-hmm.
And happy to be having that experience here.
So great to hear. So thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you at Moss House soon.